Hello, everybody. It's me, Producer Ross, and welcome to another edition of my ITFC. And it's an absolute pleasure to be joined by good old Foz. How you been doing during these weird times? How you been?
Yeah, I've been very well, thank you. I've kept well, touch wood here in front of me, but it has been a strange old time. But I've been one of the lucky ones and one of the few Town fans who've actually seen all the home games this season. And that's helped keep me going, I think. It really has been something to look forward to. I'm making the announcements on the PA. Not too many people hear them in the ground because there's not very many people in there. But of course, on the club's I Follow service and on BBC Radio Suffolk, you can hear my little voice in the background sometimes. So great to be part of what's happening this season, albeit in strange circumstances. I was actually born in Ipswich back in 1959, and it was during my time at Sygate Lane Primary School that I got into football, typical sort of playground stuff, kicking a ball around. And then my dad, who knew I was really getting into football, suggested he take me to a game at Portman Road. That was back in January 1969. Ross, well before your time.
Yeah.
You've heard a lot about these days, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Right at the start of the Bobby Robson era, although the game I went to was against Burnley, and I think I'm right in saying Cyril Lee, the coach, was in caretaker charge because Bobby Robson hadn't quite joined the club. It was a few days later that he agreed to become manager at Portman Road. So this was the transitional period between the previous manager, Bill McGarry, and the new one, Bobby Robson. And Town won this game at Portman Road that I went to with my dad, 2-0. Ray Crawford and Mick Mills were the goal scorers. I don't remember too much about the game itself, but I remember the thrill of going into the grounds. And it would have been what was known as the Chicken Run stand, which is where the Cobbold stand is now. And there were a lot of people in the ground, I remember. Couldn't really see very much because I was only a youngster. But the thrill of actually getting inside Portman Road and seeing a game, that's never left me. And for me, you know, there's nothing better than going into a football ground and watching your team in action at home or away, in fact. I've done a lot of away trips down the years. But that Burnley game is etched in my memory. 2-0 win against Burnley. A few days later, Bobby Robson took charge, and the rest, as they say, is history. Suppose my all-time favourite player today, when I speak to you here, Ross, is Alan Hunter, although I spoke to your colleague Mike Bacon a few months ago for a piece which has just appeared in the paper, actually, looking back on the 2000-2001 season. And I told him that Arnold Muren was my all-time favourite Town player. It's a toss-up, really. Alan Hunter, Arnold Muren, two wonderful players, great characters. I mean, Hunter was a big character off the pitch, but Muren, for me, was such a pure footballer and opened up all sorts of opportunities on the pitch for people like Alan Brazil and Eric Gates to exploit. And exploit they most certainly did. But if I had to pick one today, it would be Big Al, Alan Hunter. What a character. And for me, you know, he was so critical as part of Bobby Robson's team in the 1970s. And obviously him and Beattie together, ham and eggs as they called them, were absolutely fantastic. And I wouldn't have wanted to play against those two. They really knew what they were doing. I suppose, yes, it has to be Bobby Robson. But having said that, I didn't really have too much to do with Bobby Robson while he was at Ipswich because I was a youngster still at school for some of the time. And then I was in insurance for 6 years when I left school in 76. And when I eventually got into radio full time in 82, that, of course, was the year that Sir Bobby Robson became England manager and left. I did do some interviews with Sir Bobby after that, of course, when he was promoting various books, and indeed when he came back to get the freedom of Ipswich, big 30-year anniversary of that 78 FA Cup winning side. So he in many ways is my favourite manager for so many different reasons. But the manager I really clicked with on a professional basis, and indeed when we'd stopped doing the interviews I was doing with him, was John Lyall. Because not too many people know that West Ham are my second team, always have been. And when the club appointed John Lyall to replace John Duncan, I was thrilled because John Lyall was a very decent manager, and I thought he would do a great job at Ipswich, which he did. He could talk for England, and we would do radio interviews, which would go on far too long for what I needed on the air. But after I'd switched the tape recorder off, we would sit and chat in his office, for half an hour, sometimes 3/4 an hour. He just loved talking football, and he could see that I was obviously listening to every word he was saying, and we did hit it off air as well, which I love. So I got to know John quite well. Covered his funeral in Ipswich, and I'm proud to say that I did know him. And I also followed his team that won the old second division championship home and away that season. And that was a marvellous season and one of the greatest seasons for me in the club's history, because it got Ipswich back to where we all think we belong, in the top flight. And it was the very first Premier League that we got into. And of course, had a good season, actually, the first season under John Lyall. Where I think the club possibly went wrong was allowing John Lyall to sort of move upstairs, which meant that Mick McGivern, his trusty number 2, great coach, suddenly became the managerial figure. And I don't think that sat very well with Mick McGivern as a person, and it didn't sit very well with the fans either. I'd like to have seen John Lyall, in charge for another couple of years so we could establish ourselves in the top flight, but sadly that wasn't to be. All-time favourite game, and any Town fan that was at Wembley back in 1978 will say this, because it was the culmination of quite a period for Bobby Robson. He had won the Texaco Cup a few years earlier, but this was the first major cup that Town had won, since really they won the championship back in the 61-62 season. So for Town to get to Wembley was amazing, and the whole day just went by like a flash. It really did. And going back to Alan Hunter, he had Malcolm MacDonald and Frank Stapleton in his pocket from the word go, and I think that was crucial for Town that day, because I firmly believe that Arsenal just didn't fancy it. They weren't up for it. I think they realised that Town were a lot better side on the day than they perhaps imagined, and Liam Brady was playing in midfield for the Gunners, and he was a class midfield player, but you hardly saw him during the game. It was all Ipswich from start to finish, and Hunter and Beattie at the back didn't have much to do, but whenever they were called on, of course, they did the business. And that was a great platform for the rest of the side. And I wouldn't mind betting Alan Hunter, before the game, when the players were in the tunnel at Wembley, before they come out, I wouldn't mind betting Alan Hunter was having a few words with some of those Arsenal players, telling them straight that, they were in for quite a game and not to mess with Big Al.
Now, let's get into your favourite Town goal. Once again, there's been thousands scored, some belters, some scrappy little tap-ins, but whatever. But for yourself, have you got a few to pick from?
Yeah, I suppose, the FA Cup run, back in 1975. I'm sounding like an old fart here, really, but I do love all the modern stuff as well. But the 1970s for me was what got me really into football big time, and it has never left me. But when we played Leeds United in the FA Cup, I think it was the third replay against Leeds United at Filbert Street. I went along to that game, travelled up there with my dad and my cousin Colin. I remember the trip in the car because it was the first time I'd ever heard my favourite band, Dr. Feelgood, on the radio. So that was a good start to the day. We got to Leicester, and really it was so tight in the previous games that we weren't expecting many goals, if any goals at all, because they'd been 0-0. But this was a fantastic game of football. John Walk was making his debut for Town at the back, and he was being looked after by Big Al, of course. And I know that Alan Clark was causing all sorts of problems for young Walkie, but Hunter got hold of the defence and made sure that Walkie was playing his part, which he did. But it was Clive Woods. He got the winner from well outside the box, curled the ball in, gave Town the 3-2 lead, and indeed that was the match-winning goal that took Town on to the next stage of the FA Cup in 1975. So that was probably my all-time favourite goal, because the sheer relief of getting a result in that game and getting through. And we really fancied our chances as a club. I'm sure they would have agreed with me of getting through to the Wembley final. Sadly, we had Clive Thomas to thank for us not making Wembley that year in '75. But I won't go on about Clive Thomas because he's been a thorn in the side of any Town fan from that era. And he's still alive, so I can't say too much at the moment. Favourite kit was a kit that I never actually saw in person, as it were, because I was too young to watch the team. But I think the lovely blue and white kit from the 61-62 season, when Town won the league championship, I wanted to get a retro version of that, but missed out when it first came out, and I've never seen any since. So I'd love that to come back again. And obviously the 1978 FA Cup final shirt. But my all-time favourite has got to be the one from the first season that I watched Ipswich, 68-69. A lovely all-blue shirt with the club crest, as it was in those days, before the Suffolk Punch. It looks so smart. And I did get a retro one of those many years ago, but sadly I can't get in it anymore, funnily enough. My worst moment, actually, was being told by my boss at BBC Radio Suffolk that I couldn't go to Wembley to watch the playoff final against Barnsley. And that really was my worst moment, because for the semi-final, I'd been working on the PA at Portman Road with Rob Chandler, and the scenes were wonderful. You know, Jim Midgelton's hat-trick, it's one of the greatest games ever seen at Portman Road, and I was there for that. But I knew that if we got through to Wembley, and it was by no means a certainty, was it? Because we'd failed on numerous occasions before, that I couldn't get to Wembley because I'd already committed myself to a BBC music event in Bury St Edmunds. It was one called Music Live, and I tried and tried to wriggle out of that, but my editor of the time, who's now well and truly off my Christmas card list, has been for, ever since really, said, "No, Foz, you've agreed to do that. I want you at Bury St Edmunds." When I was at Bury doing my 2-hour music show at lunchtime, also there working for the BBC, but working for Radio 1, I think at the time, was John Peel, who was a big Town fan. He was a season ticket holder. And we linked up to do a piece on my programme. And after we'd gone into the next record, I sat with John Peel on the wall outside Woolworths in Bury St Edmunds in the centre there, moaning. Well, we were doing more than moaning, bemoaning the fact that we could not be at Wembley watching our beloved Ipswich, because John was a big Town fan. Liverpool was his number one club, obviously, but we sat there for a long, long time, actually, chatting and moaning about the fact that we were both working for the BBC. And no word of a lie, when I finished at 2:00, I'd made sure my car was parked nearby. Don't tell anyone about this, but I got back to Ipswich in about half an hour straight, and by 2:30, I was sitting in front of my TV in Ipswich watching the build-up to the game, and of course was delighted when Ipswich eventually won the playoff final against Barnsley with that wonderful fourth goal by Martin Rooser. I can hear the commentator Terry Baxter in my ear right now. And then afterwards, I thought it was just going to be quite a relaxing evening. Terry phoned me up because he was working pretty close to the club. Of course, he was at BBC Radio Suffolk still, but he had very close ties to the club, and said, "I've got you an invitation to the evening bash on the Suffolk Showgrounds." So I went along to that, shared a few beers with some of my favourite players at the time, Jim Midgelton, Matt Hollands, those sort of players I got to know quite well. And it was a wonderful end to what was a wonderful day in the history of the club. But for me, there was so much disappointment, and I still hate the fact that I wasn't there at Wembley in 2000 for the playoff final after all those years trying to get there. I mean, I did 78, so I'm pleased about that, obviously, but I do regret missing 2000. But yeah, I've never forgiven my editor of the time, and I'll give you his name if you like, Keith Beach. Keith Beach, the man responsible for my biggest disappointment as a Town fan.
So, for yourself, have you got a personal, best moment? I'm sure, announcing, being on the PA is up there, but anything else?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, announcing is a great pleasure and privilege at Portman Road, particularly when things are going well. But match-wise, Wembley 78, one of the big highlights, of course. But at the semi-final for me, when we beat West Bromwich Albion 3-1 at Highbury, I was in the crowd that afternoon. The relief at the end of that game that Town had finally made it through to an FA Cup final. And a lot of people, a lot of younger people watching this may not realise just how important the FA Cup was in those days to every football club in the land. It's been devalued in recent times, well, for quite some time when I think about it, really badly, I think, and it should still be up there as one of the great cup competitions. But, you know, the way the big clubs treat it these days is nothing less than criminal for me. But back in the 70s, you know, the big day was the FA Cup final. And to finally get through, I mean, the relief at Highbury that afternoon, and all the Town fans there will know what I'm talking about, was massive. And we had an FA Cup final to look forward to only a few weeks later. So that was a big moment. Also, when Town clinched promotion to the Premier League, the inaugural Premier League, when John Lyall was manager, and we did that at Oxford. That was a wonderful day. I was in the Town crowd for that one. Really tremendous day, and once again, the culmination of a tremendous season, because we'd played really well on our travels as well. I went to virtually all the away games, and you know, we'd been to places like Cambridge and Southend. I mean, Neil Thompson's goal at Southend late in the game was another highlight for me. When I look back on memorable goals, that was a tremendous goal. Once again, another shot curled in, just like that Clive Woods one from many years earlier. So those sort of moments have never left me and never will. And in more recent times, you know, to watch George Burley's side make Europe in their first season back in the top flight was quite remarkable, really. And yeah, and Marcus Stewart, some of the goals he scored, you know, we haven't seen the like of that since, really. Darryl Murphy had a really good season, didn't he? But we haven't seen too much quality, you know, striking as Marcus Stewart, you know, since those days. And he will always be a hero of mine as well. So, yeah, sorry to waffle on, Ross, but yeah, it's all coming flooding back now. Yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on. Is there anything else you want to add? Maybe another question for myself. You know, how did you get into radio yourself? You know, did you always have a passion for it? You know, when you know, probably listened to it on the radio yourself and stuff like that. How did it sort of come about for you?
Yeah, it really came about because back in the 1970s, when I was also heavily into music, I used to listen to Radio Caroline, who were broadcasting just off the Suffolk coast, actually, not far from Felixstowe, and used to listen to the evening show while I was supposedly doing my homework. I don't remember doing any homework, but I do remember putting all the playlists together, you know, as I was listening, writing down the records being played. So I really got the radio bug then. In 77, auditioned for Hospital Radio, having done a little bit of work on the microphone at my church youth club, and thankfully got in at Hospital Radio, was there for 5 years. During those 5 years, got to know a few people at Radio Orwell, as it was then, from Electric House in Ipswich, did some part-time work and got offered a job there in 1982 as a trainee journalist in the newsroom. I didn't really see myself as a journalist. I saw myself as a broadcaster. I wanted to do programs, but that was a good way in for me. And my interview took place in the back bar at the Great White Horse Hotel in Ipswich, a sadly missed pub. There are so many sadly missed pubs in Ipswich. But Chris Opperman and Andy Clues took me for a lunchtime drink, and about 4 pints later, they offered me the job. So I accepted that, you know, straight away. I didn't need to be asked twice, and had 8 very happy years at Orwell. And then BBC Radio Suffolk came knocking on the door, or I knocked on their door, and I got my job there as a business producer on the same day that Tina Turner played at Portman Road. So that was another memorable day back in 1990. And the last 30 years have absolutely flown by. Football's been a very major part of what I've done there. Music, obviously, has been probably an even bigger part. But just working with so many great people and interviewing so many people down the years, including, most town players and managers. It's just been, a thrilling experience, and I wouldn't have changed it for the world.
It must be the perfect match when, a global superstar is playing at Portman Road. We've had, very lucky that we've had, likes of, Tina Turner. We had Ross Stewart recently, Elton John. I even go to Pink. Pink played there as well. Yeah. So it must be good for yourself when we don't do it. It's not that often. Unfortunately, we don't get as many people in recent years, but it's just great that we do get these, global superstars coming to Portman Road.
Yeah, I know the club would love to have had Ed Sheeran there, but for various reasons it didn't happen. So to see Ed Sheeran, attend some games there as well in his town shirt is always a thrill. And so pleased for Ed that he eventually did come to Ipswich and play those wonderful 4 nights on Chantry Park. I mean, that was an incredible weekend in the history of the town. But for the football club, yeah, they'd love to have had Ed Sheeran there, and never say never. You never know in the future. But yeah, those names you've mentioned there. I got to interview Joe Cocker backstage at Portman Road when he was on the same bill as, I think, Rod Stewart and Status Quo that night. It was a really good bill. And all sorts of other great acts as well. So it does lend itself really well to live music. And Barry Manilow's another one of your favourites, no doubt, Ross. You were there, weren't you? Barry Manilow?
Yeah, definitely. But there we go. Well, Foz, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining me.
It's been a real pleasure talking to you, Ross, and all the very best for 2021.